Alright guys, some people had asked for a complete front-to-end build on an Xbox controller, so I'm going to try to do that. This controller is for one of the Reddit Black guys. Keep his identity a secret, but basically we've got a fresh Xbox One controller here. I haven't opened it yet, so seal is still on there, and then he wanted some blue surrounds on it. We're going to put in buttons on the underside for A and B under here, so you can do jump and drop shots. We're going to put in trigger stops, short stroke the triggers a little bit. We're definitely going to swap the LED over to a blue one. Then I'm going to put the creek stop foam in here and do a couple hours of play testing. So, let's get into it. Set that aside. Get this, which is oddly sticking for some reason. I don't know why. This one's different than the other ones I've seen. Alright, so there's that. Basically, I threw some of my tools in here real quick. You can do this part. I've done it with guitar picks in the past, but you basically just need to take these side panels off. So guitar picks work, or these little cell phone tools. These are like 50 cents on eBay or Amazon. And the trick here is often just get in under here, pop that. Scuff has a good video on how to do this. They include the same tool with theirs. You just, pop these things off. The reason why I like to do it with guitar picks is because I have like hundreds of them, and sometimes you need two tools to actually get some of these off. There we go. And then that's the inside of there. Another trick is to, just push this down and then get inside here, and usually you can crack each side of the seal like that. So I like to use these little disposable throwaway containers for holding screws and stuff in. When I actually get to the screws, I have a magnet that I like to stick in there, and then the screws all stick to the magnet. Okay, so what you'll need to actually take the actual controller apart, there's two bits you need. One is a Torx security bit, and you might not be able to see this here, but there's a slight little hole in the end of that, and that lets you get into the security bits. And then you need a T6. Now you can usually pick these up for a couple of bucks online, and some of the kits actually include them. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws on the outside edge. So just going to grab those now. Having a magnetized screwdriver here helps a little bit, just because when you pull them out the last little bit of the way, they'll just kind of come with the screwdriver, but not totally necessary. And if you have a non-magnetized screwdriver and you want it to be magnetized, you can cheat a little, and you can magnetize it by just rubbing it along the edge of something that is magnetized, or you can actually buy a magnetizer for a couple of bucks that will magnetize and demagnetize tools. But that's completely unnecessary for the most part. You just, it makes you do a little more work. So these ones aren't going to play along. Alright, so, and this happens sometimes, they just, you know, they don't come out. In which case, a little set of tweezers. I just have some medical clamps here. I like these, they're cheap. I get them at the Army store for like $1. And they're really useful. And then there's one behind the center of this label, which I usually just poke right through. And, you know, it's just take right out. Okay, so that's that, and then the shell could just come right apart, and that's how you get the old shell off. Don't quite toss them to the side yet. You're going to need these two clips, the battery clips, and you can just usually just pry up on them. If they're really stubborn, you're going to need a little screwdriver or something like that. Like this side's a little more difficult, right? And then they usually just pop right up. And on the reverse side, you have to push them in to get them to come up. So you just got to feed the clips through right there, and then that comes off. And you can set that to the side, and then on this side, you might as well, so you don't lose this. Put them back in. They only go in one way, so you can't really screw this up. And then push these in until they snap in. And there you go. So that part's done. So now what we have here is this. Now I can't remember if he had asked if he wanted the rumbles in or not, but I have to take them out anyway to do the mods on the circuit board, so I'm going to send him a message. But there's a trick with this too, in that I have to go grab my electrical tape from the other room, but you can do it with regular tape. If you're going to leave the rumbles in the controller, you just take a piece of tape, right, and split it in half, or something along that line. I'm not actually going to use this, so it wouldn't be that way. But you cover that over, and then the rumbles stay in. So whenever you flip the controller, they don't fall out like that. So there's that. Like I said, I need to actually remove them anyway to do the work on the controller. So we're going to do that now. Just a note, something that you want to keep track of when you're working on these, is that the wires on here are set up a certain way. So there's two sides of the controller, obviously. I'll just draw a little diagram here. So if you're looking at the back, you've got two ports right here. You'll just see two loose wires, and then you'll see two more loose wires here. Okay, and so these ones are for the rumble, and these ones are for the trigger rumbles. And the way that they set these up is that the outside one is the black wire on both. And then on this one's gray, and this one's red. And then you basically just have the reverse thing on the other side, where gray is here, black is here, and then red is there. So there's that. Figured it was worth noting. And I'm actually going to put this down so that's not too distracting while I'm doing the rest of this. But I need to, I'm going to fire up my soldering iron here and set it to a decent temperature. And that takes about a minute or so to come up to temp. This is in Celsius, so if you have one that's in US, just do the conversion on Google or something and you can figure it out. But I always start with 350 because it's a good one. While we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and mark the positions here for my underside buttons. And basically, the way that I originally did this was I just put ink on my fingers, transferred it to the bottom, and I wanted my middle fingers to hit the buttons. So that's the way most people do it. So I just did that. But what I did was I actually measured it and did this. If you're just doing a one-off, I would do the ink transfer method or like Sharpie transfer. But basically what I do now is I have this all figured out mathematically and all that jazz, and I just come in here and drop a dot down there, and that tells me where I need to drill. And so there's a small dot there and a small dot there, and that's where I need to drill. And we'll do that next because I don't really need to at the moment. Alright, so I keep a big glob of solder on the end of my soldering iron when I'm not using it. That's just to keep it safe. So then I clean that off. And then my tip is there. I'm using a chisel tip for anybody that may need to go out and purchase a soldering iron. Make sure you get a nice tip. The ones that are just like a fine tip, like a pencil tip, they're not really good for this kind of work because you don't get a lot of surface area contact with whatever it is that you're soldering. So here I'm basically just taking a pair of tweezers, and I don't really have an order that I do these in. I just I know I need to desolder them all, so I just pull it off, hit it for a second, pull the wires straight up. Yeah, this is like, super simple work. This is probably one of the easiest soldering pieces you'll do. Unfortunately, the ones that come later are a little harder. So what I always tell people to do for practice is if you have like a Goodwill or some kind of thrift store near you, just go to their cheap electronics section and clear them out of like old stereos or alarm clocks. And learn how to take things on and off boards there, and you don't have to go out and buy like a huge electronic starting kit that's like 30-40 bucks, and then maybe you'll get a radio out of it or something like that. So yeah, what's happening here is, I've noticed this before, they use different types of solder on some of the joints, and so like they'll all come off but one, and I don't really know why that is, but you can just hold it down longer or increase the heat on your soldering iron, and that usually does the trick. Or they seal it with like a glue, which that happens too. Alright, so I've got the rumble packs out. I've got the trigger wires desoldered. I'm going to leave everything inside this plastic shell that we have, just because it's going to work better, and I didn't get a new undershell with the kit that he bought anyway. So some of the kits, if you want to take them further, they include new undershells, but I find that largely to be unnecessary. Okay, so I'm going to get my little magnet back out. And this magnet, I like it because it has two pads in it. I use one for the regular pads and then one for the circuit board pads. And this just came out of like an old money clip. So this board is the only one you really need to take out if you're just doing the scuff buttons. And there's two screws here, one here and one here. If you're going to do the LED mod like I am, you're going to need to take the one below it out as well, which is you know, a little bit more of a pain in the butt, but you know, we'll get there in a minute. So that comes off, and then take these sticks off. put them in your bin. And this, basically, you just need to give it a nice steady pressure, pull it out, it comes right out. I'm going to set this to the side for now because that's what we need to work with. So there's two ways to do this. I'll post links in the description that give you a layout to the circuit board. But basically, you have this. This is the right joystick, as if you were holding it like this, and this is the left. This is the B button, and the B button has two leads on it under these little carbon pads, and the buttons actually press that down and short that circuit out, and that's what makes or completes the circuit rather than shorts it out, and that's what makes the button fire. And it also has a lead that comes down here to these two teeny tiny solder points. So you can either scratch some of this carbon off and solder directly to that, or if you're good enough, you can get it onto one of these teeny tiny solder points. So that's what I'll be doing because I know how to do it that way. And then for the A button, you have this little doohickey here that it's just a set of pins that connect to these pins down here. And if you're looking at the right thumbstick and the one that's sitting to the right of it, it's on the bottom, it's the middle pin is the A. And so those are the two leads you need to do, and they share common grounds, and there's grounds all over this board because they have common grounds. But the one I like to use is down the bottom. You see these 4 circuit pins here, and I like to use this one, but you can use the one off of the thumbsticks too if you really wanted to. I just find that that's easiest to deal with when stuffing everything back in the controller. So I'm basically right now I'm going to pause the video because I have to run upstairs and grab something, and I just don't want to leave it running. But I'll be back in a second. We're going to basically take some wire, and we're going to do the soldering on this, and I'm going to reposition the camera too, so that's good. I'm also going to grab some flux, which makes things easier to solder, and then some stuff to clean the flux off with because it could corrode the board if you leave it on there too long. So we'll stop right here. I'll grab that. I'll be right back. Alright, so I went upstairs and I grabbed my flux, and I couldn't find my little needlepoint applicator, so, you know, whatever. I grabbed some stuff to do the cleaning with, and, you know, let's get started. Crack a drink here. Alright, so, a brand new bottle of flux. I just got it. I used all my other one. And flux is really nothing more than like tree sap mixed with, or dried tree sap mixed with like rubbing alcohol anyway. It's like really sticky, and you know, so like I like to take it on a Q-tip if I don't have my applicator, and just dab it on the spots that I'm going to be messing with. You don't need a whole ton, and that's why the Q-tip is nice. So yeah, you can basically smell the rubbing alcohol like right away in it, and how sticky it is. You can tell that it's tree sap. So then I also need to get 4 lengths of wire, 2 for the ground on each one, and 2 for each of the leads. So this wire lasts damn near forever. So I basically just cut like a 10-inch. For people that have never done it before, I suggest cutting like a big long amount. You know, more than you'd need, just so that you have enough room to work with. I have a little ruler that I use to cut them because I know exactly how much you need, and it's the bare minimum, and it just makes it last longer. But if you've never done it before, don't be really afraid to use quite a bit of wire. You could also strip like the inside of a USB cable and use that, and that's pretty damn easy to do too. Those cables are thin enough. Alright, and then the ends of these wires, you don't even need a wire stripper. You can just kind of pinch in between your fingernails, and you can get to the inside of that. And you want to take your flux and coat those So I only need 2 for now. We'll do the ground in a minute when I flip the board over. So strip that off, run your flux on it. Cool. Let's bring the soldering iron back up to temp. And you know, basically for these, you're going to want to tin the wires. So tinning the wires is essentially just, you know, getting a little solder on the end of them, which helps. And for these, you actually don't want the leads to be too long. You want it to just be the very tip of the wire. So I'm going to trim these down to like basically like a 1/16 of an inch. I really don't want my soldering irons playing along here. There we go. Alright, so that's coming up to temp. Basically just sticking these things in helping hands. If you have a Harbor Freight near you, these little helping hands tools are like $2 or $3, and they're immensely useful for this kind of stuff. And then these are just the snips I was using. They're specially made for cutting electronics wires because you get a completely flush cut. But you can use almost anything for wire that thin. Scissors, doesn't matter, you know, regular side cuts. These are like, again, like dollar store side cuts that I just keep around for working on my guitars mostly. Yeah. So that's coming up to temp. It'll be there in a second. And while we're waiting for that, I know a lot of people have been talking about this. I finally got in the mail my new airbrush for doing some custom paint jobs. And I also got an air compressor and then a second air tank down here. So, you know, I'll start working on that stuff pretty soon here. Alright, so cool, we're up to 10. You need solder for this stuff. I use rosin core solder. I use the .032, but I also have like another one that's like, I think, thinner. It might even be the same. .032 lead-free solder. This is leaded, which actually works better. This is lead-free. Just don't breathe the smoke in. I have a fan running very slowly that usually does a lot of that stuff, but just don't breathe it in. Like, it's only a hazard if you're doing this stuff all the time. Alright, so I cleaned off the pen here. What I'm going to do is just add a tiny bit to it to make what's called a solder bridge. And I just basically add a little bit of solder to the end of this so that it burns better. And I just tin, that's what that's called, tin both wires. And there's like a million videos on YouTube on how to do this that are way better than mine. But at least if you know what to look for, you know, maybe it'll be more helpful. Alright, I am going to try to do my best to keep this in view of the camera. But I'm going to start with the A button. And actually, this wire's a little too long. Just because some of the sheathing melted back whenever I tinned the wire. So, yeah. And what's actually pretty helpful here, again, is the tweezers, and any tweezers work. These ones are just curved. Like I said, it's the middle one. And so the flux makes that just bond like almost instantly, and it also keeps it from, you know, going all over the place, which is nice. And then here I need to do this top solder pad, which I've already coated in flux. And again, I gotta trim this back because the heat claimed some of that wire. Not a big deal. And I like to clean my soldering pen after each time I use it. Put a fresh solder bridge on there. For this one, you can actually cheat a little and feed it through this gap next to the right bumper. That helps helps keep it in the right spot. And you need like a 90-degree bend in it. And this is where having the curved curved one comes in place, and you just want to give it a little tug to make sure it's not going anywhere. For this one, I'm actually going to add a tiny bit more. I was foolish to think that would work. Alright, cool. So that's good. I've got some alcohol wipes that I use for cleaning these areas after they've had flux on them. And so you just do that so that the flux doesn't corrode any of the circuits or traces. Like I said, you could just use alcohol on a Q-tip, like rubbing alcohol, and that would also do the trick. So yeah. Alright, I'm going to get set back up, flip that around, and then we'll do the other side. Alright, so I'm back. Oh, well, sorry. I get the side set up. This is the side we were just working on since it's flipped over. This is the right thumbstick side. I've just gone ahead and brought these wires, you know, back over. Another step here, we're actually going to go ahead and get some hot glue and glue those down. So I'm going to do the grounds now so these wires can actually be together. So what I'm just going to do is take this, pinch these together, grab a little bit and strip the cables or the wires, and then twist these together so that they form a nice twisted braid. You know, so you're just splicing them together essentially. And throw some flux on the end of there. This will adhere really well because there's a lot of space in between the wires for the solder to get drawn into. So when you're soldering this kind of thing, you just throw a little solder on the end of your pen to act as the solder bridge, and you get that on the wire. And basically what you want to do is heat the wire up, not try to just paint solder on it. You heat the wire up and let the solder flow in between the tiny little gaps, and then you're good. And then again, what I do is, you know, you don't need a long lead on here, so I just snip this one pretty damn short. And we are on this pad right here, the top left one in that series of 4 pads. You can consult the circuit guide that I'm going to show you later. Now, a lot of people would just solder it like this, so the wires come off the bottom. I wouldn't do that. I would solder it coming from the top or one of the sides, just because it's easier whenever you're putting the shell back together to do that. So you get your soldering iron back out, I'm just trying to keep this in so you can actually see me soldering rather than my hands being in the way. Cool. So, like you said, there's a lot of good soldering videos out there on YouTube, but essentially what you're looking for is a nice shiny bead of solder. That means you have the temperature set at a good temperature and that everything is smoothed over properly and there's not a lot of crap in your solder joints. Alright, so I'm going to shut the soldering iron off for now. We don't really need it. But we are going to move over to the drill press and get the button holes drilled. So I'll set the camera back up and we'll do that side. Alright, so I use a drill press for this part. You could use just a regular drill. It really doesn't matter. If you have a bit big enough to fit the buttons that you're using, do that. I have one that I'm going to try to use, but I also have a reamer to take it to the exact dimension that I want. But the basic thing that I do here is I get my drill plate out of the way. And I basically just come in here and drill them from the bottom. And I do the same thing. And I don't actually use, the winding operation of the drill to do it. I'm doing it by hand for feel. I have this at a low speed. The drill itself is kind of set to a low speed, so it's not going to like grab this thing and throw it out of my hands. I've done a ton of controllers this way, so this is going to be a little loud. But yeah, so you just see me do this, and then I'll move up to my my stepper bit, which is basically just kind of like a bunch of drill bits in one, and I will take it up like to the third step, which is only 1 millimeter off of what I actually need, and I'll just do the rest with the reamer. So I just want to get the hole started. Alright, so that, that covers that. I like to do that to try to get plastic shavings off of there. So now I need to just change up to the stepper bit. This is kind of the only part you really can't fix if you screw it up without using some kind of patch or something like that. So I don't really know how you'd fix it because I've never screwed one up, but this is the part that you actually want to be the carefulest with, or the most careful with. So I know that my switches are 10.2 or 10.3 millimeters, so I can go up to this third one on the steps without screwing something up. So that's all well and good, but I just like to do this to visually tell that story. And you'll see the same thing on my reamer, and then I don't really have to remember exactly what it is. I just do what looks right. So there's your hole. Do the same thing on the other side. Alright, so that's not quite perfect yet. So, like I said, I have a reamer, and the reamer is nothing more than like a $2 tool. You could just also buy the right size drill bit, which I just don't have. But basically this comes in and you just twist it from side to side. And I've showed this in the other video, but it basically just cuts the plastic, you know, in each direction. And I've got that tape on there to mark. This is the only thing I use this particular reamer for. But you know, I used these when I worked in the gun shop too. And you do this. Now this creates a lot of, you know, plastic mess that you're gonna have to clean up afterwards with like an X-Acto knife just to trim it up. But you know, I'm going to go ahead and do it with an air compressor. Let's see. Alright, so that's really all I needed to do there. I'm going to go ahead and get my X-Acto knife. Just trim up these edges. I'm not going to film that part because it's kind of just stupid, just trimming up plastic. But then I'm going to go ahead and I will film me gluing in the switches and get it and preparing the switches. Alright, cool. So I got that all cleaned up using an X-Acto knife. You know, that takes a few seconds. Just be careful doing that because you really can't undo those mistakes very easily. I basically just kind of try to flush trim it. But yeah, so we've got our buttons here. These are the ones, I'll post the link to them in the description. If they're out of stock, it's usually my fault on Amazon, so I'm sorry. I kind of just buy them in bulk whenever I run down to about 10 or so left. But yeah, so you only need one set of the leads on them. For some reason they have four for mounting onto circuit boards. So you only need, like I said, 2 of them. So I bend these all flat anyway. I use them all, or use them flat. I don't let them stick up. So I just take these, and I do this because the flush cuts aren't really made for cuts this thick. And I just trim them off. They come off, you know, super simple. You know, and then we do that to both. And now is actually a good time to, so I don't have to do another weight, plug in the glue gun, craft gun, or whatever you want to call it. So I have two. I have an industrial one and I have this light one. And the industrial one is way overkill most of the time. And actually, I don't know how to react the industrial one with the plastic on this. I don't know how well this one does. The industrial one works really well for the OEM ones, but they have a really solid plastic. I mean, this is, for the most part, feels exactly the same, but I don't want to take the risk it was a slightly, I don't know, less dense or something like that, and it just doesn't work out correctly. But what we can do while that's heating up, because that takes about a minute, is we can get these buttons in here. And basically, I like to fit them in ahead of time to make sure, A, that they fit. So if I need to do any fine tuning, we can do that. And then I like to turn them around to make sure that I can put them in the direction I want without any issue. And basically, I just hold down with my thumb, come over here, and make sure I can hear that nice solid click. And so what I like to do is keep the leads, the legs, down in the grip area because there's more room down there, and I fold them down. And so basically I'm just going to throw a piece of tape on there to help hold it in place, and I like to glue up 3 sides. So basically where the switch is, I glue here, here, and here, and it's enough to hold it in place, and then you can still get to these. If you have to do maintenance, you can pull them off. It just makes it easier. Some tutorials out there will have you drown the legs in solder. You know, I don't do that, but I'm going to start up the soldering iron too, so that gets up to temp. Um, and I actually like to tin my legs here, because you're not going to get another chance to do that, or it's a lot harder to do it whenever they're in the controller, because you don't have as much room to to work with them. So again, with the flux, I basically just hit that. And I will go ahead and just say this: I did this for a long time without flux. It's doable. It's not hard. It just gives you better quality work. And I really didn't start doing that until I started offering this as a service to people. So like, I always use flux. But like for my personal ones, I almost never did, and they all turned out fine. But for something that I'm doing for somebody else, I like the quality to be a little higher. So I use flux. And yeah, so I just get these helping hands out again. I hit all 4 legs at once. So this is super simple, and it'll go by really quick. So yeah, so just, I don't know if this is in view of the camera or not. There we go. So that smoke that you see whenever you apply heat to solder is actually like the flux itself. It's not like the solder melting, it's the flux. And that's why you use flux core solder. It just basically cleans the connection up, for lack of a bigger explanation. So those are nice and shiny. And I'll throw heat back on that, and I'll just leave the soldering iron on, because I'm going to need it in a few minutes anyway, when we actually attach some wires back up to these guys. So I'll take my my cleaning wipes and clean these up. Like I said, this is basically just pine tree sap, so it's like really sticky, but it just gives you better quality. You can actually make your own flux with dried sap if you just scrape it off of a tree. If you've got trees near you, you can do that, or even pine cones. You can get like the white stuff that's on a pine cone is usually sap, and it works. I've got flux all over my fingers, so it's like super sticky now. But so here, what I'm doing is taking a piece of tape, and the side that I'm not gluing down, I'm using this to help me, hold the switch in place. And you just want to make sure that the switch still fires, and you do that on both sides, so that you can make most use of your time, because once the glue gun starts to work, you just kind of want to run it in one straight go. And we'll do that for these wires on here. I'll show you like a way to help anchor them. Okay. Alright, so I'm happy with that. And basically this works really well. I like to, with anything, just clean this off first, so I get a nice consistent flow and I'm not pulling behind any junk. And here, I like to just hold it down so that it's firmly in, and then take this down and throw some glue in there. Some glue in there. Some glue in there. set this back down, and typically I like to still make sure that the switch fires. So I let that cool. If you have compressed air, you can tilt it upside down and spray it on there. It'll force it to cool faster. I just let it air cool. The important thing is that you don't want to screw with that too much, because then the glue will get into where the switch mechanism is. And then you got to get that all out of there. Use like a hairdryer or something like that. Big pain in the ass. So, you know, I like to do it right the first time, as they say. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. And then this time I'm just going to hold it in with my hand. I actually need to tweak this a little bit so it's not at the ridge. Alright, so I just glue that in, and you know, that'll cool. So while that's cooling, we come over here, and here's our circuit board again. And so I just flip it over, which is the easiest way to do it. And basically, I like to anchor these down, which is a drop of glue. So right here, wham, wham. Let those dry. This is exactly what other companies, I won't name their names, do. They just glue, you know, throw a little bit of glue on there. You can clean up these little tails later. That doesn't matter. And then on the other side, when you flip it over, the only one you really need to worry about adding one to is the ground. And you can just do it right next to it. And if that ends up like causing you grief when you're putting it back together, like it's taking up too much space, and the controller won't, like the shell won't sit back together, you can trim that with a razor knife of any variety, but I use X-Acto knives. So you know, that's good there. So yeah, so this is actually done. I'm just going to get in here and you know, pull this tape off. Actually, it's not totally cold yet. Yeah, you know, it's looking good for the most part. So I'm going to get my my tweezers and clean up these little tails that, you know, come from the glue gun. It's pretty standard crap though. And you know, we test the buttons again, and they're great. They work perfectly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and attach these wires now, because I've got all the soldering iron running and everything. But long story short, you need to take one of the grounds to each of the switches. It doesn't matter which leg of it goes to, right? And then this wire coming from the top here needs to go to the B switch, and one needs to go to the A. And it doesn't matter which post you do it to, but A needs to be on the left of the controller, and B needs to be on the right for your standard. Alright, so my battery died. Sorry about that. I think what I was explaining was basically how the wires were, you needed to do them. So you need to take one of each of the common grounds and pair it up with one of these, right? So I usually just like to give them a quick little, you know, braid together, so I know that I have them together the way they're supposed to be. And I like to come up to this little corner here, and you know, twist these together. This doesn't have to be loose or tight or anything. It's more for organizational purposes. The way that these switches work is it just closes this connection. So it doesn't matter which of the two legs go to which wire. So you just need to put two wires. But what does matter is this wire coming off the top is for the B button, and this wire coming off the bottom is for the A. A is typically on your left hand, B is on your right. Right? So jump shot or parkour for Titanfall, drop shot over here. So when we wire this up, you can actually take it off of this now. When we wire this up, you can think about it this way. This is your A button. It needs to go over here. This is your B button, and it needs to go over here. And the reason why you make these wires so long when they only need to go like a couple inches is when you take this thing apart, you want to be able to do, you know, service on it. So what I like to do is set this here, do this, and like I said, just twist these wires up, you know, the whole way up here, just so they're bundled together. And then what I like to do is trim them flush, just so they're the same length. Yeah, and then basically we just well, we get our soldering iron back on. Throw that up to temp. These ones can be a little longer because the leads that you're soldering them onto are obviously longer as well. And like you said, because it's just a simple tiny little circuit, you don't need to carry, like, it doesn't matter which wire goes to which lead on the switch. So that part is very not even critical. I just strip these and then clean them up just a tiny bit. Take some of my flux, hit those, which just said it's for, you know, just prepping the wires basically. And these were already prepped, but you know, you can hit them with just a tiny bit of more to make things go correctly. So like I said, this is A, the one coming from the bottom of the board, and the one coming from B, you know, that goes over here. This is super simple to do. What I like to do is bend these leads down on both sides so that they're you know, nice and out of the way, and the board goes back together cleanly. Alright, so I need to tin these wires, you know, real simply here. Shazam. You know, real simple. And then so I like to do this part with the, you know, the tweezers again, just because they're so damn useful. And again, they're pretty cheap. What I do sometimes need to do is prop this up somehow, and in my case I just use these clamps because I already have them, but it just makes them easier to work on. So I ended up not using the tweezers because of the angle that I was at. Just it made more sense to do it this way. Just make sure you get a nice solid connection there. Give this a quick pull. You know, we're good. So then, like I said, I just like these to be bent down so they're just not in the way. The only time I ever screwed one of these up was because I had one of those tails that was just too long and it was, you know, shorting something out. So this is A, and this is B. So we'll just, you know, switch this. And make these a little shorter. They don't need to be this long. I like to do the one that's closer to the outside edge of the controller first, just because it, and now I'm actually going to need these, but it's just easier. It's just easier for me to do it this way. I'm going to turn the soldering iron off because this soldering iron comes up to temp like super fast. But the next thing I'm going to need it for is the LED, which is, you know, like I said, not hard. It's just kind of a pain in the butt getting the case all apart. So this part is actually done. Like if you just wanted the A/B buttons, you could stop here. But he wants a little more than that, so we're going further. So this is where you need the tiny, small screwdriver again. Like I said, I like to keep these split up. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws down on the bottom of here. Yeah, and whoever he bought this shell off of, good vendor. I like their product. I'd buy theirs again in a heartbeat. I don't know too much about the chrome shiny ones yet. They seem to be made of like a different plastic that I don't particularly like. But I've only done one of those, and that was for a neighborhood friend. He went with like an Iron Man theme. You get like shiny orange or red. And then we spray painted some of the surround pieces yellow rather than having to buy 2 shells. And I'll cover some of the gotchas in this area too. A second. Alright. So, some things about this. If you plan on replacing these plastics here, you're going to have to drill some holes in the front if you want the IR features to keep working with the Connect. But these pieces typically come with full shells, but we want to leave them black in this case so that you have a black and blue layout going on here. So, yeah. Alright, so to get this piece off, which you, well, actually we don't need to do that right now. You can do that piece last, but you have to take it off when you put this back in, because it's a pain in the ass to put this back together without that being out. Basically you can just pull this piece up, and you have to work with these 2 plastic pieces there, and this comes off. Now this gasket is actually what presses those carbon pads down for like the guide button and the B buttons and stuff. So you want to be really careful. You don't want to lose this or any of the buttons. So make sure this stays upside down like this when you put it away. Most people don't have spare buttons. You can order new ones, but we're not doing that. So this is the second board. Right here you'll see the LED, and this is the big one. We're going to knock that out of there. I'm going to go into my parts bin, and I still have a whole bunch of the ones from the 360 that I like to use. They're harder to solder, but I think they look better. So, and they come on all these different strips, and there's like 20 or 30 on each one. But he wants blue. So, this is the same one that another person that I posted before got, and there's that. It's super tiny, so I'll just drop that on there. And I like to test them to make sure A, they work, and B, that they're the right color. So I have a multimeter here, and you can test LEDs, which are just diodes, with that arrow with the line going through it down here. It's usually the continuity test on most of these things too, so whenever you touch the ends together, you get a little beep. But these LEDs, you can only light them up one way, and there's typically like a dot or an arrow on there. So you can only light them up. So this is definitely blue, and it definitely works. I don't know if the camera picked that up because it's such a tiny thing, but it gets amplified a little better. So it's definitely blue. It's the one we need, and it works. And the way that these go is most of these have a dot on them, and the dot on here, or an arrow, goes to the right, so power flows through that way. You have to be a little careful with that. If you do it wrong, basically you just got to take it apart and do it. And you can't test it when it's on the board because the power doesn't flow through the circuit the right way. So we bring the soldering iron back up to temp, 350 Celsius centigrade. I don't think there's anything else I can actually do while that's... Actually, there is. So the trigger stops, everyone probably knows by now that I make them out of gun leather, which is leather that I use for making like knife and gun holsters. I got one around here somewhere. So, you know, this is a gun holster that I had made a while ago using Kydex and just rough, thick leather. And yeah, so I make them from leather because they're durable and they're like self-cushioning to a degree. And I've got a little cutoffs, and they're good. And the way that I do that is I typically like just glue them in so that like if somebody really needs to take them out, because I asked a lot of people, and typically what they do is they have one controller for shooters and one for everything else. So it's not that big of a deal to most people to not have them be adjustable. But there's ways we can do that too. It's just, you know, more work. But basically, I just need two really small 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch pads here. So I like to just take a straight edge here, and you know, I just kind of eyeball it because I trim them down after I put them in anyway. But I just put a fresh blade in this X-Acto knife, so it'll cut these pretty damn easily. Yeah, so that went really well. And then, like I said, I only need 1/8 inch sections, and I like to give this a nice fresh edge here. Okay, so that's done. I got this cut. I'll show how I attach those later. I just kind of wanted to use the time as efficiently as possible. So we have to get this LED off. This will test your soldering skills a little. If you have the chisel tip, I would recommend buying it if you don't, because you know, this part can be difficult. I'm going to go to sideways angle here so you can maybe see what I'm doing. I'm going to use the tweezers again, and these are almost mandatory at this point if you're going to be messing with these LEDs. But I'm basically just going to grip this and keep the solder on that side of the pad, and try to lift this up. Now, these LEDs are very temperature sensitive, so you can't, well, for this one it doesn't matter because we're taking it off, but for the new ones, you really can't sit on it for more than a second or two at a time, simply because you'll burn the component. Put it in here. So I've already got one side loose. I'm basically just going to come here with the chisel tip, hit that, and this comes right off. I just throw the old ones away. I do have a couple that I can use there. Well, I like to clean these up with some solder wick, because that can be a little messy when you're prying things off a board like that. So again, this part isn't wholly necessary, but it can be, depending on how messy it is coming up. And then I like to add a fresh ball of solder to each one of these pads. That one. Cool. Alright, so I've got to dig this little LED out again, and I've got to make sure that the little arrow is pointing right, which it is. Grab this with the tweezers. Like I said, this is the hardest part. What I was doing there is just reflowing the solder to be a little more helpful for me. This is why we use the tweezers, because this is a pain in the ass if you've got it pointing the wrong way, flipping it around correctly. Good Lord. I don't normally have this much issue with this, but these tweezers do kind of suck. They make better tweezers than I'm using. These are just tweezers from my bathroom that I commandeered. You got it. So usually once you get one side, the rest is pretty easy, because you're just nudging it into place. Cool. So that part's done. Grab some solder for this, put that away. I won't need this soldering iron again until I put the rumble packs back in. I'm just going to leave it off because mine comes up to temp pretty quickly. And we just need to reverse the last couple steps we did. So we need this sub-assembly here again, except we have to take this piece off. So you can just, when it's disconnected like this, it's actually really simple. You just kind of pop it out. Now the thing you have to be careful here is the sync button. It's kind of in its own slot that's attached to the controller shell itself. It's not part of this. And you want to make sure that that goes in correctly. And these buttons here, they're all keyed. They only go in one way. And you want to make sure the buttons are all in the right way. Yeah, you just want to make sure you do that part correctly. So all these ones are in there. If you're really having problems, you can stick a sheet of tape on the one side to keep them from moving. It's just a little tip. I haven't needed to do that in a while, but yeah. So you need to make sure that goes in first. And then this goes in right on top of it. And you usually have to tilt the front end part of it first to get it under the bumper or shoulder buttons. And then you just want to make sure it just falls down into place. Okay. At this point, you actually do want to go ahead and put your screws back in so that it's nice and firm when you go to put this the guide button cover back in. So I like to start with this middle one, and when you get one screw in, just go. As soon as it starts to give you just you can't do it anymore with light pressure, just flip this over and make sure you got your buttons all in the right spots. The B will still move a little bit because it's got this part of the board there. But yeah, you just want to, keep an eye out for that. And I just realized I did the LED without the flux. It shouldn't be an issue because it came off cleanly enough, but the flux, I honestly just forgot to do that step. It's not a big deal, like I said. So yeah, most of the videos out there that you see, no one's going to use flux anyway. But I at least wanted to make sure it was represented in there. And the guide button itself, it's not that big of a deal because it doesn't get the same amount of abuse or usage that the other buttons do. So that's why that part is it's important. This video is going to be long. Yeah, now we're doing good. Got some Pandora playing in the background. I don't even know what I'm listening to right now. Alright, so now we got to put this back on. Like I said, mind the sync button, but typically the easiest way to do this is you've got to fit it behind these because it's keyed kind of like a dovetail. You've got to fit it. Sorry, my battery just keeps dying. I got this piece back on. Just make sure you get this sync button on there correctly. And all these buttons, just check them now while you've got this still like this, that the A, B, X, and Y are still where they should be. B will be a little mushy because there's nothing behind it. Just keep that in mind. So this part, you just drop this under the triggers. Make sure you get these trigger rumbles out of the way, and then you'll look down in here and just takes us just a little pressure to get that back in there, and everything should be there. You get 2 screws, one on each side here, same ones that you took off before to put back on. And don't strip them. Just get them until they're, just in there enough to work. And then run back to your parts bin and grab these sticks. They just go back on the top here. Alright, fire up the soldering iron again. We need to put the rumbles back in because he wants them in. Got a message back from him. We need to reattach the trigger rumbles too. So while that's heating up, I've actually got stuff that we can do. I got my tape. Like I said, we're going to put this in. Now, what you want to remember is this controller is going to hold this way, and the rumbles are actually 2 different sizes. The small one goes on the right hand, which is typically aiming. Big one goes on the left. So feed these wires through here. Drop them in. This is all, you know, pretty standard stuff. And then you need 2 strips of tape that are, you know, stripped down half thickness. So I just take these and throw them over each side here. That's way too long. So, and that's dropped in there. And I know just from experience that, like, I just had to cut that other side, so it was just too long, so just shorten up this side a little bit. And we'll just set that in there, and now these won't come out while we're soldering it back in, and they're actually just, it makes the whole thing feel a little more, you know, tight, just a little more assembled, so to speak. So again, for this part, we need the tweezers, and we've got that same layout we knew about before. Down here, so the black goes on the outside on both, gray in the top, red in the middle. The only thing you have to do now is you have to worry about your wires that you put in as part of your mod getting in the way. So just, you know, don't do that. What I like to do here is do the gray one first. Because it's on the inside and I have a little more room to work with it while the black one's not in place. And these go back in like super simple. So in this case, there's more room to work with the middle one, so then I do the outside one, which is the black one first, for the actual rumble itself. These wires are getting in my way. I'm just going to hold them in. Another trick for soldering that I don't see a lot of people do is I like to plant my elbow, or even the back side of my hand against the surface to, you know, to plant it in place, and that makes the whole thing so much easier because it's giving you a stable, steady surface. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on both sides. I'm only going to film one just because of all the battery problems I'm having with my camera. Try to conserve some of that. But it's, you know, it's the same thing, just in a different spot. So I'll get those on and then I'll film the next step. Alright, got both sides soldered up. So now we're just getting into the spot where we actually need to, you know, start kind of doing the assembly. So here it's just a matter of pulling it the right way, as if you were looking at it from the top, and pulling these wires in to where they'll ultimately are going to sit. Now, it's usually easiest when you're putting this back together to make sure that the battery strips are going in correctly, and you usually have to nudge the triggers in a little bit, and then everything will just kind of fall into place. But when you do that, you also need to make sure that either your wires aren't going to get like over here. I need to pull these back a little because they're going to get tangled up where the rumble pack is. So again, this is usually only an issue if you're actually going to run the rumble packs. Still, some people take them out because they do save quite a bit of weight. But I like having the extra wire in there because then it makes servicing it easier. If you or anybody who comes after you, maybe I'm not the one who fixes this in the future. Say I die and get hit by a bus and somebody needs to get in there and either fix it or make, you know, new enhancements. They have a little bit of extra wire to deal with. And then the other thing you want to do is tuck, you know, this standard wires back in there, and then you want to make sure everything's a nice fit. The triggers work. and all the buttons move. So that, you know, that looks good actually. So we'll actually stick the top plate on, make sure everything lines up. So I kind of already did some of this beforehand, but I'm just giving you some things to check for. So we want to do you know, these 5 screws again, and what I do is I start with the middle one because it kind of holds everything together nicely. These are the security screws, so you need to switch to your other screwdriver at this point. The threads in the plastic will likely have never been tested, so it's probably going to be a little rougher going in here than it was coming out of the other controller, and that's because the threads on the screws are actually cutting the plastic for the first time. So just do all 5 of these and we'll pick up at the next spot. Alright, so got those 5 screws in. Now we're going to put the trigger stops in. So go ahead and set up your hot glue gun again. And this is a good time to, while that's heating up, make sure everything functions as far as A, B, X, Y. They're all the right way. The buttons still move and the triggers operate. So everything looks good. I do need to test to make sure that this shell works with the chat adapters and things like that. Sometimes you need to get in here and trim this little notch just a little bit to make things work. But while that glue gun is heating up, what I can do is get these batteries out of the box. We can test the LED while that works. And sometimes you need to actually bend these prongs out, because whenever you take them out, they're not totally, you know, back in there fully. So we'll need these grip panels, and we'll also need the battery door. So battery door, I like to make sure all this stuff fits, and it does. And the blue looks, you know, it looks great. Yeah, so take this out. I don't like leaving those in while I'm in there mucking with it, but so we got those 2 little leatherettes that I made before, and how I like to prepare them is they've got the tanned side of the leather and then there's the non-tanned. So I typically just take either some tweezers, or in my case I take these medical clamps because I like working with these personally. And I take an X-Acto knife, and I like to score the tan side a bunch so that the glue will hold into it better. And so just set that down, and I just run my knife through it in random crisscross kind of patterns. So then the idea here is once the glue's up to temp, I stick it right here. I stick it right here and then clamp the trigger down onto it. And that's actually the leather that I bought. I've already trimmed it a little bit. It's the exact depth that you need for a stop for both Call of Duty and Titanfall. So glue this up on here, and like I said, we just want it on the corner there, and then I use the trigger itself as a clamp. Serves two purposes. Obviously, it stops the triggers, but it also softens the harsh click between the trigger assembly and the side of the inside of the controllers. Alright, so that's good on that side, and we'll just move over to here And I'll do this side without the medical clamps just to show it really doesn't matter. I'm just using the tweezers. Throw, just a dot of glue on there, right onto the corner here, and then use the trigger as a clamp. Alright, and then the other thing that you can do here is, after those have dried, if you want, you can take an X-Acto knife and trim them up a little if they're impeding on the grip panels from coming onto the side here. That's not a big deal in this case, so it really doesn't matter, but what I like to do now is, this is just foam sheets, they're adhesive. I just like to cut from this just two pieces. Like I said, you can usually get those at the dollar store for next to nothing. But I take these and I drop one in the middle of each controller side or grip side, and what you sometimes have to do is trim these up with an X-Acto knife or something so that they're not as tall. So you just kind of shape the thickness of them so that they're not quite so tall. And actually these aren't overlapping at all, so I don't need to trim those. And this just snaps in, and that just snaps back in, and then we got batteries. And I am going to need to tweak these springs, they're a little loose for my liking, but custom controller, so I'm going to go do some play testing on it, make sure the chat adapters work, and then if the chat adapter doesn't fit correctly, that's situational, and it's hard for me to tell you what's going to be wrong. But like I said, one of the things you have to watch out for is this notch might need to be trimmed out. I just do that with an X-Acto knife or the chisel tip on my soldering iron. But you have to be a little careful when doing that, because then you could really screw up the back of the controller. I'm very careful when I do that piece. The other piece is looking at this straight on. It looks good, but sometimes the board isn't sitting in there flush, and you have to take it all back apart and make sure that none of your wires are pushing it. But this one, it's done. It's in the books. Buttons on the bottom, trigger stops, and we swapped the whole shell out, added the creek stop on the thing. Still feels nice and solid and sturdy, and it's ready to go to war. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Post in the comments. If you have ideas, post them in the comments, or if you want, subscribe. There's a whole bunch of these other kind of videos out there on the playlist, and check them out. Just let me know what you think. Thanks.